Hello and welcome back to the channel. The third season of The Mandalorian has come to its end and I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about it. So if for any reason you still haven't watched the final episode of this third season, I have to tell you right away, spoiler warning, don't go forward watching this video because I'll probably spoil something for you. So if you want, go watch the episode and then come back to this video. Now let's get into it. I really liked it. I liked this season and so there you go. That's the video. But no, seriously, I mean, this third season is not like the first two, but I kind of like to see the story progress, to see that the story becomes, larger, that it takes into consideration a lot more characters and a lot more is in stake. Because, this is still a Star Wars show, and it's a show that is a part of a larger story of the whole franchise. And similarly to what we usually get with a lot of these Star Wars shows, animated and now live action, we usually get the main, character or characters and their story, but we still get to see how their story is connected with the larger story of the whole galaxy. And the same thing is happening with The Mandalorian, because in the first season it was all about Mando or Din Djarin and Grogu and protecting Grogu, bringing him back to his own kind. But then in the second season we got to see a little bit more of other Mandalorians, and then in the third season we got to see even larger story. And so, like I said, you follow the main characters, but then you get a little bit of here and there of parts and pieces of a larger story that that is going to become much more important down the line. And so the first season ended with practically the exile of Mandalorians from Navarro and their migration to another place. It also ended with the Darksaber, with Moth Gideon possessing the Darksaber. And that meant that in the future seasons we are going to get a lot more of this Mandalorian culture, tradition and mythology. Because with the Darksaber, you have a lot of history there and a lot of symbology in it. And so the end of the first season was showing us that we are going to a larger story in the future. Because we were wondering what happened with Bo-Katan and why is this Darksaber now in possession of this Moth Gideon guy instead of being with Bo-Katan, and what happened to her and how she lost the saber, So the second season actually reintroduced us to Bo-Katan and gave us a little glimpse of her fight against the remnants of the Empire and showed us that she is in pursuit of Moth Gideon and reclaiming back the Darksaber. And we were also reintroduced to Ahsoka, and we saw that she is looking for Grand Admiral Thrawn. And so those were two side stories that showed us that there is a lot more going on in the galaxy other than Grogu and the Din Djarin. And so now this third season progressed even more that story of Imperial remnants and cloning and Shadow Council and Project Necromancer, and so that we can expect what's coming next. Not just for the upcoming Ahsoka series, but also for Din and, now Din Grogu. And ultimately, of course, to that Dave Filoni's movie that will kind of culminate all of these series into one. Looking at it now, when the season is finished, all in all, I have to say that I'm satisfied. To me, season was great. Well, minus episode 6 of this third season. To me, it was probably the worst episode of the whole series, of all 3 seasons so far. It was not all bad. I mean, it was fun to see bits and pieces of that town that kind of looked like that pilot project on which George Lucas was working on, the Star Wars Underground, or I can't remember off the top of my head how was it called, but there are some of the shots from that project that can be seen on YouTube, and this episode 6 of this new season actually reminded me of that series. It was fun to see droids again after all these years. It was fun to be reminded of the Clone Wars because it did kind of look like a Clone Wars episode, a mystery story, a detective story. It was kind of fun, but the overall story of the episode was kind of naive, stupid, dumb. I don't know how to call it. Of course, I'm just talking about my opinions. You can have your own, you maybe loved that episode, so it's all fine, we all can think whatever we want. But the main thing for that episode 6 was the beginning and the end. That was the most important thing that progressed the story. But I still feel that those two parts, the beginning and the end, could have easily been incorporated into some other episode with some other story. But we got what we got. It is what it is. It kind of feels like that those decisions for the actors and for that story were not coming from Favreau and Filoni. Maybe it came from higher ups, and we don't know how that works and what kind of demands higher ups have on the writers. But the writers, the creators of the show, have to work with those demands and try to incorporate them into their story. But that's just my opinion, that's what I think. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be that was Filoni's and Favreau's story. That's how they imagined it. But it still felt kind of out of place, in terms of the whole season and the story, what we were getting up until that point, and then later after that episode for these two season finale episodes. I love mythology, I love comparative mythology, and so this season, with all its mythological, religious symbology and meaning, was really interesting. I really enjoyed that aspect of this season. It's really a joy to watch when Star Wars expands its story, expands its world, expands its view of the world, and not just the world in terms of the whole galaxy, but the individual tradition of some culture or a tribe in this case. So it was really interesting for me to see that. It was interesting to understand these different fractions of practically the same culture being in this conflict over some ways and views and interpretations of the same religion, same tradition. And because of all that, it had even larger impact at the end when all of these fractions came together under this idea to take over their home world. I'm kind of even glad that we didn't get to see more of Mythosaur in this season. We had a glimpse of it. It was in that episode when Din falls down into the living waters, and then we get to see him again in this season finale. But I'm really glad that they didn't reuse that Book of Boba Fett finale where we kind of expected for Mythosaur to rise out of that water like Raincorn did in Book of Boba Fett when he arrived at the fight scene at the end. And I kind of expected that will happen with this Mythosaur creature, and that Bo-Katan will maybe have some issues with it, and Din will have some problems with the creature, and then Grogu will be the one who will tame this mythical beast, and therefore Grogu will be the rightful ruler of Mandalore, which is something that ultimately I think will happen down the line, but years from now, because he's still a child, he can't even talk. But I'm really glad that they didn't decide to do that. And so in this way, Mythosaur was in this season presented as a symbol of the heart, the soul, the essence of the planet Mandalore, the essence of Mandalorian culture, and a symbol of new life. Because with his awakening, it's kind of symbology of the awakening of the whole Mandalore planet in itself. And the same symbology goes for those underground cave gardens that we saw in this last episode. Because this whole time we thought that Mandalore's surface is completely destroyed, that the planet is not suitable for life, for living, and these gardens, same as Mythosaur, showed us that we thought wrong. Still, out of all of that death and destruction, the life persists and a new life comes into being. As far as the character arc goes, this season worked with a lot more characters than the previous 2 seasons, especially the first one, where in the first one we saw the character arc of Din and Grogu, but now Grief Karga has developed as a character. Grogu is slowly developing with being comfortable with using the Force and ultimately at the end of the season doing a lot more, actually helping and participating in action and not just being someone who has to be protected and hide into that floating cradle. So we are getting his development in small steps because he is a small 50-year-old guy, but I'm sure that they have big plans for Grogu in the future. I'm still not a fan of reuniting Grogu and Din in another show. And then as far as other characters go in this third season, Din fulfilled his mission with wanting to bath in living waters on Mandalore, and that brought him back to his Mandalorian family, and it also progressed the story towards investigating Mandalore and planning to take the planet back. And then Bo-Katan developed from a person who in this season is left on her own. She is lonely, sad person, without family, without the faith, because she is sarcastic towards that traditional Mandalorian beliefs. And so because of all of these things that happen along the way, she finds her faith, she finds her new family, and she gets encouraged to unite all of these different Mandalorian fractions and to become a leader once again. I mean, even the Darksaber has its story arc in this season where it's ultimately destroyed at the end. I mean, the armor can fix it, right? So we'll see what will happen with the story of the Darksaber down the line. I mean, Paz Vizsla got his story arc and ultimately sacrificed himself. We saw a lot more of the armorer being in combat and being ruthless in combat. I mean, those scenes of her coming down, flying with her jetpack and using her tools to take down those Imperials Beskar wearing troopers was phenomenal to see. We got a lot more of ex-Woes who we saw in season 2 for a little bit, and then we wondered what happened with him. And at the end, even R5 got his story arc, and even IG was brought back first as a mech suit for Grogu and then at the end as a martial droid for Navarro. And we even saw the development of Navarro, Coruscant, Mandalore, as planets or cities as characters. And so therefore this season had a lot to build in these 8 episodes, and that's why especially it's a shame, at least for me again, that episode 6 was spent on that story, whatever it was, because I felt like we could have got a lot more of this larger story. But we never know, that story of that episode could intertwine with something that will happen in the future seasons. We shall see. But yeah, definitely this season developed a lot more characters, had to focus on a lot more characters, and it's not all about Din and Grogu anymore. They were the main focus of this last episode especially, but it's obviously not just about them anymore. We got to see a lot more of a lot more characters, and to me that's always great. Now for the bad guy, at the end, we finally found out that Moth Gideon was present through this story the whole time. He was lurking from the shadows, pulling strings, playing his game. Maybe not in person up until the season finale, but through those whispers and stories that he probably escaped from the New Republic's trial, from Dr. Pershing's story, from those pirates that attacked Navarro. It all came together at the end, showing that his plan was to become the most powerful man in the galaxy, to kind of rebuild the empire on his own and to be the ruler, and doing all of this behind the back of all of the other imperial remnants, make his own clone army of himself, but being enhanced with midichlorians, and so that his clones would actually be force sensitive, force users. It was a highly ambitious plan. We thought this whole time that Moth Gideon is actually working on bringing the Emperor back, but season finale showed us that that's not actually what he was working on. So that's interesting to see these kinds of things happening between these different imperial remnants. It's an interesting dynamic. Of course, Gideon's speech at the end, it was also, cliche and predictable, but again, it's Star Wars, it's pop culture, it's something that can be expected. It has always been there, and it probably always will, because that's the way that these stories are told. But nevertheless, it was really a great, fun finale of the season. His Dark Trooper suit was really interesting, a great design. His voice at some point underneath the helmet kind of reminded me of Kylo Ren's voice, and that staff that he had, and all of it. I mean, the design was definitely on point for Moff Gideon's suit. Is he dead? I don't know. We never saw the body. You know how it goes with these Star Wars villains. If you don't see the body, they probably ain't dead. I also love when these stories give us those little pieces that connect larger story. And so this time we got to see Zeb, that connected us to the Rebels era, and we also got to see Praetorian guards that were kind of badass in this show, and so they are connecting us to the sequel trilogy, no matter what we think of the sequel trilogy, but they do exist, and this show will ultimately lead us to that. So they did look kind of goofy at the end when they were fighting against Grogu, but bear in mind that Grogu does have few of his own tricks that he learned from Luke. The New Republic, we also got to see how the New Republic works and what's the condition of that new government. We saw them being buried in bureaucracy and being preoccupied with destroying all of those warships and not having enough willingness or consciousness to see that there is a new threat rising on the Outer Rim. And so that is one of those things that will ultimately lead to their fall. And the final episode was a great finale. It was full of amazingly shot action. The air battle between the Mandalorians and Imperial troopers. Bo-Katan in the air, pulling out that darksaber and leading Mandalorians into battle. As I mentioned, the armorer who is taking down all of those Imperial troopers with her tools. It was amazing to see. The fight of Moff Gideon with first Din Djarin and then with Bo-Katan showed us the strength of his Dark Trooper suit, because that was kind of a mech suit for Moff Gideon. And then a collaboration of Din Djarin with R5 when he is shutting down those shields, and Din fighting with those Imperial troopers kind of looked like a video game where, you are leveling up. After that, Din Djarin and Grogu working together, fighting against these Praetorian guards. It was also fun to see. I mean, you may say that Praetorians looked goofy in this fight, but when you look at it a little better, if Grogu wasn't there, these Praetorians would take down Din Djarin. They had him and they would have killed him the same way that they did Paz Vizsla in previous episode if Grogu wasn't there using his skills the way that he used them. And so it was fun to see how these two guys can work together and, beat the enemy. Din Djarin had a touching speech to Bo-Katan in episode 7 of this season, and he had another touching speech in season finale when he adopted Grogu as his own son. And so now Grogu became Din Grogu. And I was kind of feeling like, well, does that mean that Din is his last name, because I always thought that Jaren was his last name, and so I expected that this will be Grogu Jaren, but it looks like it's Din. Is that kind of something like some kind of special part of their tradition? I don't know. But yeah, I feel like that was a really touching moment, him proclaiming Grogu as his own son. And also it was really fantastic to see all of these Mandalorians coming together at the end and lighting up that great forge, and even, you know, symbolically Bo-Katan being the one who is taking that first flame and lighting up the machine, because she is the one that reunited all of them. The new beginning, the new life, the resurrection, that's practically the theme of this whole season. Because symbolically, Din Djarin, if you look at in mythological terms, Din Djarin fell into living waters and he symbolically died, his body laying down at the bottom and then being pulled or rescued back up, and in that way symbolically being reborn and now again belonging to his own tribe, to his own Mandalorian family. And then same goes for Bo-Katan, who also lost her family, lost her life. She also became a part of this new family, got new life, got new purpose. And then again, Mandalore was brought back to life, not just through awakening of the mythosaur, but also through what we saw in those underground gardens. And then finally even IG-11 was brought back to life. So resurrection, rebirth is the ultimate theme of this whole season 3. And so ultimately, as my final thoughts, I would say that I'm satisfied with the way that this season ended. This final episode looked like it could be the final episode of the whole Mandalorian and Grogu story. But we know that season 4 is confirmed, and if I'm not mistaken, it will start filming this year. But we saw Din and Grogu living peacefully on Navarro, and so from time to time they will work with the New Republic against Imperial remnants. And then at the end we see Grogu using the Force and pulling that space frog out of the water, but then the progression of his character not eating the frog, but just putting it back in the water. You know, he's doing that because it's fun, so he's not doing that to eat that living creature anymore, and that's something that Luke taught him. Now for my gripes, I really don't have a lot of them. I can say that the tempo of this season is definitely different than the previous 2 seasons. The story was moving really fast, and that especially goes for the last 2 episodes, and especially for the last episode, where I feel like that episode was a bit too short. It was just over half an hour. Extra 5 to 10 minutes would benefit to that episode. And then again, when you think about the episode 6 and what we got there, again, I feel that this story of season finale was worth the last 3 episodes. And for me, it's a shame that we didn't get that. And then my final gripe has nothing to do actually with the show, but instead it has something to do with the internet and the fandom in general. I have a feeling that we are destroying our own experience of these final episodes with overthinking, over theorizing, and I know that that's something that we can't help ourselves. We love this franchise so much that we are so invested in these stories, and we have our own theories and predictions of what will happen at the end. But when you look at this last week, when we were waiting for this last episode, so many theories and predictions rose on the internet that ultimately at the end you kind of feel like you are disappointed when none of those theories actually becomes real. It kind of takes away from the excitement of seeing what we actually do get instead of what we predict will happen. But all in all, looking at it now when the season is finished, I'm really satisfied with it. I could have been someone who will come here and trash the season, because that's really easy to do, you know, because that's something that unfortunately attracts people, bad news, bad informations, but that's not something that I like to do. That's not something that's part of my character. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be alive in this day and age, and to have an opportunity to see all of these stories and all of these shows that are coming out. I really think that this is one of the golden ages for Star Wars again, and that it's really exciting to be a Star Wars fan. We are getting a lot of new stuff for which we can be excited. And so that's something that I feel I'm really fortunate to have at this moment in my life. It's not like first 2 seasons, but I still love it, and I love the direction in which we are going with this story. I love that we are going towards a bigger picture, a bigger threat, and it will all come together first through Ahsoka, probably, and then definitely at the end with Dave Filoni's movie. So, hey, I'm all for that. I want to see all of it. But now I would actually like to hear you guys. What are your thoughts on this season 3 of The Mandalorian? Do you have a favorite moment? Do you have a favorite fight? Anything. What did you think about this season? What did you think about the finale? Let me know down in the comments. That's all I wanted to say for this video. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here with me, and I'll see ya in the next one.